You know, sometimes the biggest fights start in the most unexpected places. In Arizona, a neighborhood dispute has absolutely blown up into a full-on legal battle. But we're not talking about a fence line or an overgrown lawn here. No, the property in question is digital real estate, the community's online forum. And this case brings up a question that could affect millions of us. So that really is the million-dollar question here, isn't it? When your HOA uses a digital platform to communicate, to run its business, does it have the power to just silence you with no formal process at all? Well, that is exactly what one homeowner is asking a judge to decide right now.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at the online fight that kicked this whole thing off. Then, we're going to dig into the homeowner's claim that his rights were violated. We'll see how the HOA defended itself, listen in on some key testimony from the hearing, and finally, we'll unpack the huge question that the judge now has to answer. All right, so how on earth does a simple online message board end up as a legal battleground? Well, it all started on a platform that was actually designed to bring people together.
So, let's meet the players. In one corner, you've got Kenneth Halal. He's the homeowner, the petitioner in this whole thing. And in the other corner, the respondent, his HOA, the Crest Ranch Homeowners Association. I mean, it is the classic setup, right? Homeowner versus HOA, but with a very, very modern twist.
Now, this whole thing revolves around a platform called Townsquare. And you got to understand, this wasn't just some random Facebook group or a casual chat room. No, this was the official digital hub for the entire community. It was the place you went to pay your dues, to get official documents, and, this is the important part, to discuss neighborhood issues. Think of it as the community's virtual town hall. So, after getting blocked from the Townsquare Forum, Mr. Halal didn't just fire off an angry email or complain to his neighbors. Nope, he went straight to the legal system. He filed a formal petition, and his argument was that the HOA had violated a really fundamental legal principle.
And that big principle? It's called due process. So what is that? Well, in simple terms, it's the idea that nobody can take away a right or a privilege you have without giving you a heads up and a chance to tell your side of the story. Mr. Halal's whole case is that his access to the community's main communication hub was a privilege, and the HOA just yanked it away with zero warning, no hearing, nothing.
And look, he wasn't just making some vague accusation here. He came with receipts. He pointed to specific Arizona state laws and even the HOA's own bylaws, you know, the rules they're supposed to live by. His point was pretty straightforward. Hey, you guys have a rule book for how you handle violations, and you've got to follow it, even if the property we're talking about is a digital forum.
All right, so what did the HOA have to say about all this? Well, their defense was pretty interesting. It wasn't really about whether Mr. Halal's posts were out of line. Instead, it was about something much bigger. Who actually had the authority to police him in the first place?
The HOA's entire defense really just boils down to one simple sentence. Townsquare is not our platform. They're saying, hey, we don't own it, we don't run it, we don't control it, so our rules, our bylaws, they just don't apply there. See, from the HOA's point of view, there's a clear chain of command here. You've got the HOA at the top. They hire a management company. This one's called Associa Arizona, and that company is the one that uses the Townsquare platform. So, since Townsquare is a totally separate business, the HOA is basically arguing they're 2 steps removed from any decision that gets made on that website.
And this is really the heart of their defense. They're saying there are 2 totally different sets of rules in play. The HOA's own documents, their bylaws and all that, yeah, those govern the physical world, your property, the common areas, official meetings. But what you do on the digital forum, they argue that is governed only by Townsquare's own terms of use. You know, the thing every user, including Mr. Halal, had to click agree on.
Okay, this is where things get really juicy. During the actual administrative hearing, both sides had to make their case under oath, and we get to hear some of the key moments from their testimony.
So when an HOA board member, Donald Morris, was asked why Mr. Halal got the boot, he did not hold back. He testified that Mr. Halal was reported to the platform's owner for what he called a pattern of hostile and really offensive posts. He even gave specific examples, like using derogatory terms used for female genitalia and calling other members names like douche canoe and crack baby.
Well, as you can imagine, Mr. Halal immediately jumped in with an objection. He argued that the board member was just speculating and that the HOA hadn't actually shown the posts as evidence to back up these claims. You can almost feel that classic courtroom tension, right? It's just one person's word against another's. But here's a twist.
The judge overruled him. And her reason is actually a fascinating peek into how these kinds of hearings work. She explained that, unlike a regular trial, hearsay, secondhand information, is totally allowed. So the testimony could continue. And that was a huge ruling because it meant the HOA side of the story was officially on the record.
Okay, so let's just boil this whole thing down to its core arguments. When it comes to control, Mr. Halal says, hey, the HOA reports users, so they're responsible. The HOA fires back, nope, Townsquare is the third party, they have all the control. Then on rules, Halal argues that HOA bylaws and state laws should apply. The HOA says, not a chance. On the forum, it's Townsquare's terms of use, period. And all of this leads to the big one, due process. Halal says his removal demanded a proper HOA hearing. And the HOA's response? Not our platform, not our problem. We don't owe him a thing.
So, after hearing all the arguments, all the testimony, the judge is now left with the really modern and kind of tricky legal puzzle to solve.
And really, it all comes down to this one question. When an HOA uses a third-party digital platform to talk to its community, who's legally on the hook? Does the HOA get to outsource its legal duties to its members right along with its message board? Where does the HOA's responsibility end and the tech platforms begin?
So, at the end of the hearing, the judge put a clock on it. She said she'd have her final decision ready within 20 days. That means a ruling that could really set a new precedent for digital communities everywhere is just around the corner. But in the end, this whole case forces us all to think about a much, much bigger question. As our communities, our neighborhoods, move more and more of their business online, our old-school rules about property and who's in charge are really being put to the test. And the answer to this question, well, it's going to help draw the new boundaries of power and rights for millions of us in this digital world we're all living in.